Hello, friends and extended family. How are you today? I thought I would make a quick video just to say hi, touch base, let you know what's going on. I have finally gotten a full psychological testing done, which was basically all the written tests and not just sitting with a psychiatrist for 20 to 40 minutes and having them roll the dice on some sort of guess at my psychological condition at the time of the interview. So it came out pretty much as expected by me. There wasn't too many surprises there. Basically, the ADHD was a prime influence. The there wasn't any. I didn't test for borderline personality disorder or narcissism. Neither of those things showed up in the testing. And it was the very first psychiatrist I saw who threw out narcissism, and then that followed that sort of laziness in the first visit with a psychiatrist sort of followed me through the other interviews, because the other psychiatrists can take a look and see what other psychiatrists have said. And to me, that just rings laziness. If you have a complex individual with some complex issues and problems, it's much easier to throw out narcissism than it is to throw out something a little riskier. Because the joy of narcissism is that a narcissist would say they aren't a narcissist. Now, I personally didn't say that. I went and looked it up, and I examined the literature on it, and it didn't ring true for me, knowing myself and my dilemmas. So that was very validating for me that wasn't the case. Although I considered my upbringing as a potentiality that I might exhibit some of those behaviors. But a narcissist wouldn't consider that, I don't think. So anyways, I mean, on all levels, it didn't ring true for me. But I didn't try and argue it either or fight it with these people, because that is what a narcissist would do. So that was good. I like that. I did score a little bit in the antisocial personality disorder, which I was sort of expecting. And again, I put that down to my upbringing and my habitual behaviors designed to survive my childhood where I was placed. So I mean, those sort of things are difficult to break in adulthood when they've developed sort of unconsciously to fit in. And then there was the major depressive disorder. I did score in the paranoid a little bit. And I wonder about that. I'd have to look more into the paranoid personality situation myself. But my opinion is that my paranoia isn't a mental health concern. It's a societal concern in the West. How about that? I don't think anyone going through some of the less above board adoptions is going to be able to escape a certain amount of personality or paranoia when it comes to the system, once they've fully examined their adopted life and all the lies and secrecy and just the outright shadiness of the whole adoption paradigm. So, all those things being said, I found it to be quite validating. I found it also to be a little bit frustrating because I think this should have been done right at the very beginning of when I sought mental health treatment, and not have me have gone through this 5 year adventure in trying to, get some decent medical health assessments and treatments. So, anyways, hopefully that will be helpful with future court appearances to do with my daughter, and hopefully that will put me in better standing with the courts and be able to help me move forward with some of my bureaucratic nightmare that I'm still uh, working my way through. I have considered going back to work in finance. Part of my problem with that is a little bit of confusion surrounding usury. I do see how usury is something negative, and yet in the secular world we live in, it's become so prevalent that it's nearly impossible to think of a world without it. But I'm an idealist, and I can well imagine a world without usury, and I think that would be fantastic. But at the same token, my lack of a university education that I was deprived of sort of puts me in a situation where, as if I want to make a large amount of money in a smaller space of time, to possibly get myself out of Canada, then I might have to go back to that. What can I say? I don't have a spiritual mentor right now that can advise me on that situation. But you know, through prayer and whatnot, I can ask for guidance and forgiveness if I'm not doing the right things by working in that industry. What else has been going on? The book. Well, I got that first 5 chapters out really quick, and then it just kind of, I needed a bit of a break, because I mean the childhood part has been there for a long time, and parts of it are still painful to go through, but it's really getting into now. Whereas my venture into sexuality, drugs, being sort of following the herd possibly into the wrong directions and things, and there's some resentments there, and there's some pain there, and there's some difficult topics to discuss, but I'm still hoping to finish the book, possibly, maybe not by the new year, but in the early January, February, March, hopefully. I don't know what the editing will look like, but this will be a learning curve. But I am sort of becoming excited because it is triggering. This book that I'm writing is about the factual representation of my life as an adoptee, and the inner feelings that I had throughout that life, and areas where I had to compromise myself for the sake of blending in and surviving my predicaments. So after that, I think what I'd like to do is write a fictional novel about almost a fantastical sort of version of how adoptees might rise out of this oppression and become more, and to almost reach a potential for mankind, because of the adoption process, and how it sort of combines the 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 nature and the nurture, combines those things in the positive, but also in the negative aspects of it, and sort of the possibly the weak connection to family that adoptees may find between their adoptive and biological families, because they weren't raised with one, so they didn't get the bonding experience, and yet they weren't biologically compatible with the other, so they may have lacked the bonding experience in the adoptive side as well. And again, not for all adoptees, but for a large portion. So those are sort of the where I'm at with those sort of things. The other thing that's been sort of a struggle is I'm trying to pull away from the politics. I mean, I can't believe how sucked into it I got. And it's very, very frustrating to me because I'm a very tolerant individual, especially considering the fact that I've lived so many different kinds of lives within this life in trying to find where I belong. So I certainly have had a huge diversity of peoples, cultures throughout my work in the fine dining industry, working with East Indian restaurants, Chinese, Italian restaurants, which I found interesting. Being a poor person, I wasn't able to travel the world, and I wasn't able to continue my higher education. But I found it very educational in getting to work with peoples from different cultures. So that was very enlightening for me and very educational. Very eye-opening as well on many counts. So those are some of the things that are going on. I've also been, again, frustrated with the groups, the adoption groups. It's so hard, the people that want to run the groups tend to be sometimes the people that are least capable of running the groups. And I think the same goes for politics, whereas, even like myself, I realize now that getting yourself oriented towards politics and being able to actually be involved in the conversation and possibly being able to change things needed to start at a much younger age. And unfortunately, the people that were wanting to be the bossies didn't appeal to me, and I didn't like being around them. So that became difficult. So I really think at this point, I don't necessarily want to engage so much in the debates. I don't need to. I don't want to necessarily have to debate people, especially people so fanaticized into their echo chambers and their belief systems. And some of those belief systems are complete brainwashing. And, it's very disturbing for me to see some of these people touting these dangerous philosophies and agendas and you can see very clearly that they don't understand them. I've seen too many videos of these people yelling and screaming into people's faces that they have no right to speak because they're white, or they're men, or they're straight, or they're privileged, or all of these things. And I can tell you there is no fucking thing as white privilege. As far as that goes, any societies, if you're a member of any society, any nation, and you are part of the majority populace, so say for example, an African living in Africa, or a Chinese person living in China, or a Japanese person living in Japan, etc., or a white person living in the West. Well, for now, yes, yes, you should have Chinese privilege living in China. If I come to China, I would hope that the Chinese government would have more interest in looking after their citizens than in my rights. If I immigrated to China, I would think that their rights would come above my own. Does that sound fair? I think it's fair. So that being said, wherever I choose to be a citizen, and given the sort of backwards mentality in Canada, I ultimately don't want to remain as a Canadian citizen. As an adoptee, I mean, I've been cut off from my family. So that being said, what's my next? If I want to reconnect with peoples of my lineage, what would be my next step? Well, it would be going to Eastern Europe, right? So, so that might be something in my future. Whereas maybe, I might try to get myself back to, somewhere in that Eastern European bloc: Ukraine, Romania, Austria, Hungary, that sort of area, because that's where apparently I've come from. Although I have no connection to that besides my blood, because I wasn't raised in it. I was raised by Scottish Irish. So, so all those things being said, the frustration and the ignorance, the frustration in the ignorance in the general populace these days is frustrating, to say the least. Um, just the absolute insanity going on in the world today, with very common sense issues, really concerns me and frightens me. In the malleability of the soft minds of the people watching these mainstream media, very terrifying. Um, I was watching a fella once. I forget exactly who it was, but he was some sort of whatever. He had a brother-in-law. He said, I believe, that was working in the CIA, and he says on this little podcast or whatever it was, he says the one thing he said to me, the CIA guy, was to never ever watch the television. And I grew up, and there was kids growing up in my school, like not many, but there was a couple that weren't allowed to watch television. And even then, as a kid, I watched programs about people. It was like satanic music and blah blah blah, and I thought to myself, well, I can watch a show, and it doesn't mean I'm going to go out and drop an anvil on someone's head like the cartoons, or go kill someone like a murder mystery, these things. But I really didn't understand exactly what the process was. And it was later when I really sat and meditated and thought on it. And there was little things that go along with fiction. And it's the one of the key features that we learn about in English is the suspension of disbelief. So you have to suspend your disbelief to watch a fictional program. Well, you know, that sounds very benign, but ultimately, the way our psyches work, I'm not claiming to be a psychologist, I'm not claiming to be a master, but I do have an understanding here. And the way the subconscious works more specifically is that when you watch something and witness something, the subconscious doesn't know the difference between the reality and the images and the symbols, right? So when you're watching it, the subconscious is eating it all. It's taking it all in. And I want to give you just a brief example, and I don't know if I've used this one before, but I find it very helpful to illustrate the point I'm trying to make here. So as a boy, you can imagine that James Bond might be an idol. You know, might be something that young boys really look to and aspire to. A secret agent saves the world, etc., etc., etc. Gets the girl, blah, 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 blah. But let me tell you a little bit about James Bond. Okay, so as a secret agent, I can imagine you'd have to be in tip-top physical shape. And I imagine you'd also have to undergo a regimented physical training process, along with, you know, combat training, weapons training, etc., etc., school, uh, you know, well educated, all these things. But what do we get out of it? We get the final product. So we don't see any of that. None of that is shown to our subconscious. At no point does the young boy have to internalize all of that would have to go along, and the discipline to reach that stage. What do we get as the young child? Well, we get the secret agent. He's doing all these things. But what else is he doing? He's smoking. So we don't consciously think, well, if I smoke, I'll be James Bond. But subconsciously, that's picked up. What about alcohol? What's his other thing? He loves his martini, shaken, not stirred. So consciously, I'm not thinking, well, if I want to be like James Bond, I'd have to drink alcohol. But subconsciously, bing. And what else? Terrible, terrible women. Because quite often the women he's getting involved in are these arch villainous type women. So what I'm trying to say is that when we grow up into our adulthoods and we get to, you know, New Year's Eve in our mid-20s or 30s, and we have our New Year's resolution about quitting drinking, about quitting smoking, about losing weight. Well, why do we need to do those New Year's resolutions, and why do we fail at those New Year's resolutions? Because you've trained your subconscious. You consciously don't want to do this anymore. But your television has trained your subconscious and programmed it to be like James Bond. Programmed it to be like Fonzie, Batman with the women, the two women, this, that, and the other thing. Why are men always cheating? Well, the Sunday Night Sex Show, Dr. Ruth, sexuality up the yin yang. So those crazy preachers back in the day with the satanic panic and the, you know, don't let your children listen to this stuff, it's satanic. Well, the fear-mongering probably didn't help their cause. But if you're willing to study psychology, you're willing to try to understand what a belief is, what suspending the disbelief means, and to look at these things and examine them a little more clearly and a little bit more intently, I think you will slowly also start to to understand some things. And then maybe at one point, some point, whatever, when you are watching some wacky conspiracy theorist that says something along the lines of, and he told me to never watch the television. Maybe instead of dismissing that outright as a crazy claim, you'll stop and you'll consider what you have normalized for yourself, how you got there, and what that normalization in your life is doing, how it's actually affecting you, and then try to connect those things, the things that you're doing that you don't want to do, and trying to find out where those drives to do them came from. So that's just one thing to hopefully trigger some thoughts and whatnots in you. And maybe I'll do another video just to rant and rave at some of the problems I see in the broader adoption topic going on in some of our forums. But anyways, that's enough for today. I'm sorry to have kept you so long, but I miss and love you all. All my friends I chat with, please feel free to email me back, start the conversation up again, and I'll continue working on my end and trying to get back here and update you on my wacky thoughts on things.